Hello, Midnight Coders, and welcome back to Spring into Java. Today, we're going to introduce validations to our MediaStack and explain the hows and whys about it. So make sure you've got that full cup of coffee, and let's dive on in. Okay, so first off, we want to model our request input. So to do this, we need to first make a data transfer object, or a DTO. This is going to be a record, and it's going to be an ISBN request. And all this is going to take in for right now is a string of the ISBN. That's it. Step 2, we need to refactor our controller. So if we pop into our book controller, we need to make a request in here, or sorry, we need to make a refactor in here to accept this DTO. And the way that we do this is that we are going to use what's known as an @model attribute annotation. This is part of the binding system within the Spring framework that maps your request parameters directly to a Java object. So you can think of this as construct this object and then populate it with this request. So let's make this quick change. We're going to now make this a model attribute, and it is going to be of type ISBN request, and that is going to be our request. Now, that's not all we have to do here, but that's what we have to do for start. So when a request hits the Spring MVC, it runs this through the data bind process. So the framework basically constructs the object or an instance of ISBN request. It'll look at the incoming request parameters, and it will match those request parameters to the field names inside of this Java object. And it will convert any types if necessary, so strings to longs, for example. And then it will populate that object, resulting in our request DTO. So now, why does this work? Well, this works because if we pop into our books file, this input type is of type, sorry, this input is of type text, and its name is ISBN, which is the same name as our field in here. So that is why that is going to come through the way that it does. So next, we have to refactor this validation request here. So we're going to come back into our request, and we're actually going to add a public boolean is valid. And this is going to return that the ISBN is not null and that the ISBN we want to make sure that it's not blank. And finally, we want to make sure that the ISBN matches our regular expression. So now we can pop back into our controller. Now that we have our request down here, and we can just up here simply say, if the request is not valid, then we want to return the books page. Otherwise, we're going to go in and get the ISBN from the request. And now our controller looks very similar. But this is about validations. So what if we wanted a cleaner way to validate our request? Let's pop back in here, and we're going to add some validation annotations, which is going to take care of this, all of this. So let's first off start out with a not blank. So if we do at not blank, no. Oh my God. So now if we just annotate this with not blank, we can literally get rid of all of this, because this is going to make sure that it is not null, not empty, and that there are no trailing white spaces. And otherwise it's just going to return a message to the user, which I personally like to override the default message so that we can give our user a little bit clearer message. In our case, the ISBN cannot be blank. But now what if we wanted to clean this up a little bit more? We can do pattern. This is a Jakarta validation that allows us to, yes, exactly that. So this allows us to lift our regular expression into a pattern so that we can tell that this tells Jakarta this string has to match a specific pattern. The regex is this, and the message is this. So now we don't technically need this is valid at all, because this is going to take care of all of the validations for us that we previously used. So now, if we pop back to our controller, we have a little error. So now we need to make sure that we bind the request. So this is going to be a binding result that we attach. Now, the extra thing that we're going to attach here is an at valid. So now Jakarta is going to run validation checks against the request, and it's going to return that request as a binded result. So what exactly does the binding do? This is a container for binding and validation errors. So without it, Spring will just throw an exception, which is typically method argument not valid, and it's just like not handling the error. Like you'll never know what happened. So instead, Spring will inject the result of this validation request into an object so that we can handle validation failures ourselves rather than leaving it so vague. So now we can come down into here and we can simply say, does the if the binding result has errors, then we want to just return back to books. Otherwise, we'll continue forward. Now, an extra little fact about the binding result. When we are binding the result of a valid check, the binding result has to be, there is no exceptions, the binding result has to be the very next argument or parameter, um, so that when this gets validated, it attempts to look at the very next, whenever you use this valid annotation, it will look at the very next parameter and attempt to inject the binded result from that object or from that validation request into the very next parameter. So if you had a few of these incoming requests, or if you were taking in another parameter, it would have to be after the binding result. Because again, your binding result must, and I say this with the utmost importance, it must follow the request. If that makes sense, hit that thumbs up button. Before that coffee runs out, let's take a moment and recap what we've learned so far in this series. Up to this point, we've been building a simple application that lets us track books using their ISBN number. Along the way, we've gradually improved the structure of our application. We've started out with a basic request handling. We introduced the concept of data transfer objects, validations, and clean structure. So instead of just grabbing the request directly from the controller, we're now mapping that incoming data to a dedicated object, and we're using validations against it. So we are now able to be using Jakarta's bean validations, not blank, and pattern, and we can now define validation rules directly on our DTO, keeping our controllers clean. Finally, we've also learned how validation integrates with Spring MVC's binding system by using the @valid and BindingResult. So, this allows us to safely validate incoming user data before it reaches our service layer. This might feel like a lot of extra structure compared to a simple controller method, but this structure is exactly what allows Spring applications to scale cleanly as they grow. So far, we've only been working with books and ISBN numbers, and that was intentional. Books give us a very simple data model that allows us to focus on learning the foundations of Spring MVC, such as DTOs and validation, as well as basic databases, how we can put information in there. We also learn basic JPA about how we can store and retrieve from our data objects from a database. Now, in the next video, we are going to take this project a step further. Now that we're done with books, we're going to start tracking movies and TV shows. So to do this, we are going to integrate with the IMDb's API through the OMDB, which will allow us to display richer media data such as titles, posters, and ratings. And most importantly, you're going to see how we take all of the concepts that we've learned in these past videos and how we can scale naturally in the next step. If you made it this far, thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you learned something new. If you did, drop a like so that more developers can find us, and subscribe if you want to keep learning Java as a midnight coder, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss future uploads. And if you happen to know somebody else that likes learning, share this and help to grow the community. Until next time, keep your curiosity open, your skills sharp, and that coffee cup full. I'll catch you in the next one.